Hey guys, so I'm finally back riding again, and over here at Brown Mountain, and I wanted to talk to you about crank arm lengths, and specifically for guys that use SPDs, clipless pedals. Okay, these are 175, and I have 170s on all my other bikes, but these are my oldest crank sets that are currently on my bikes. And should I go to 160, 165 or 170, drop 5, 10, 15 millimeters off my crank arm length? And I want you to consider some things, because I'm not sold on short cranks for short people. I'm short. I stand at 5'7" if I'm standing really straight. I'm technically, if I measure by inches, I'm 66.7 inches, so I'm just a little bit under 5'7", and I weigh 155. So with that in mind, I'm going to ride and point my camera down at my cranks and at my feet, and I want to give you some perspective of how I have my bike set up with my SPDs, because I'm clipped in. I have my cleats pushed all the way back, so that kind of narrows my stance a little bit, but it also, I like the feel. And so I want you to think about some things as I discuss them. If you are like me, a short guy, and considering, do I need short cranks? Everybody's telling me if my inseam's 29, so if my inseam's 29, I should be running 155s or something like that, or 150s. Or I think one of the guys was even saying 145. So I don't know. There are some tables out there you can go to. I think Appleman cranks, and you can plug in some numbers and it'll tell you how short of cranks you should be on ergonomically for your height and your length of your inseam and everything like that. But I want to tell you some other factors to consider. And I also want to tell you one thing, that I don't have a problem with my crank arm lengths. I don't have any issues with pain in my knees or my hips, and I'm perfectly fine on it. I've been doing it for years, never even thought about it until this trend popped up. And is it another trend, like when they changed the standard of moving your hub spacing out 3 millimeters and so they can accommodate more gears for Boost 148? I think a lot of this is just industry trying to change things and generate some income from people buying new shit. So, and I like to use my old parts as long as I can, so I'm kind of against that thinking of always needing to upgrade and buy new shit. I mean, there are some things you need to upgrade. I wouldn't have a bike with quick release. I would always have direct. Let me go focus back on the crank. Sorry, I diverted there. So here we go, and I'm going to point this down and give you guys this perspective of my crank arm lengths as I ride up to Brown Mountain, and just this section right here. And this is just a little section right before the parking lot where you begin or finish your ride. So, okay, so I hope you guys can see that well. And now I've got my seat all the way down. So that's one thing. So if you are running shorter cranks, you are going to be perching your saddle a little bit higher, because essentially you're going to have to be a little bit higher off the ground and with your crank arms, and that in turn makes your seat higher. So that's something to consider. Probably not so much with mountain biking, because we're not really on our saddle as much, and it's not a big deal. But if you're thinking about with your gravel bike or your road bike, then you might consider that. So that's one thing. You'll have to raise your saddle height up accordingly to how much you shorten your crank arms. You will also be perched, let me show this here, you'll be perched a little bit higher off your handlebar. So you're going to have to, if you want that same distance from your torso to your handlebars, or your arms to your handlebars, you will have to raise your stack height, putting some more spacers underneath your stem if possible, or have a higher raised handlebar. This is only 15 or 20 degree rise. It's a very flattened handlebar because this bike has a real high stack height, so I didn't want to go even higher with my bars. But my other bars, I have some that are 30, and I don't think I have any 45. Anyway, so that's something to consider. You are going to have to change other things to have that same feel in your cockpit. Okay, now look at how I'm pedaling with these, and with my cleats pushed all the way back so my toes are as forward as possible. I have this stance. Okay, my stance is this wide, and when I'm riding down technical stuff, I have that wider stance, and I like that. When you go with a shorter crank arm, you will have a more narrow stance. And hello, so that's something to consider too, is your stance. Are you going to be okay with shortening that stance with your feet closer together? The other thing to consider is your leverage, and I talked about this before. You are not going to have the same leverage that you have with a longer crank arm, and just because you know the theory of leverage, and the further out you go, the more leverage you get. So you won't have that additional torque and power gain with that additional leverage. But in other ways, it might be a benefit, meaning it won't feel as hard to pedal either. So there's advantages and disadvantages. And I think one guy that I talked to a couple of weeks ago put it to me like this, which really made sense too. He loves his, and he has an e-bike, an e-mountain bike too, and I don't have an e-mountain bike, but he loves his real short, I think he has 155 crank arms, because the motor is the leverage, the power, and it doesn't matter. So he could be pedaling and using that motor up technical stuff, and he won't strike rocks because his arms are only 155, so he'll get a full circle without worrying about too high rocks. So that's another thing. What trails are you riding? Where are you riding? And what type of trails are they? Are they real technical with a lot of rocks? Like Steve with Hardtail Party, those trails over there have protruding rocks everywhere. And so if you have a low bottom bracket and 170, 175 crank arms, that you could definitely feel where you would get a lot of pedal strikes. But it also comes back to technique too. So are you able to ratchet back and use that technique and just pedal on sections? Your trail knowledge really comes into play there too. So how comfortable are you with that trail, and how well do you know it? So that plays a factor in with that, along with your bottom bracket height. So those are the things I wanted to point out about before you consider a shorter crank arm, things to consider. And I'm considering it just because all my other bikes are 170, but I'm considering, do I want to get 165 or 160s for this bike, just because I do like to play around with that kind of stuff. Yeah, but it could be expensive. When I come into thinking over the collateral things, I will change to get that exact same feel if that's important to me. I have a lot of spare parts, so I might be able to get some of the collateral changes just with my spare parts. But if I had to buy all these new parts, like let's say I do a different crank that has a different spindle size, I'm going from a 30 millimeter to a 24 Shimano style spindle, then I'll have to change my bottom bracket too. Again, and then I told you the handlebars, the stem, the stack height, if possible. I'm not going to buy a new fork for a fork that's not cut. That would be crazy. But this fork is already cut down pretty low, and I'm kind of committed with this fork with the spacers I have on it now. But if I didn't cut it so low, I would have a little bit of play there too. So those are things to consider that I want you to keep in mind. When you change one thing, it affects everything. And then why not play around with where your pedals are? And I wanted to show you where my pedals were. Do you clip in your pedals pushed all the way back, because that gives you essentially a shorter crank arm feel, because of the circle of your feet is a little bit further in now with the cleats pushed back. If you push your cleats, you push them back the other way or all the way out, then you are having a bigger circle. So those are also things to consider too. Anyway, I'll talk to you guys later. Thanks for watching.